morning, and thank you to the U.S.-China Policy Foundation for including me on the panel today to discuss the evolving relationship among Taiwan and the mainland and the United States. My topic today is to talk about Taiwan's international space, and I'm currently working on a report on this topic, so rather timely, and was just in Beijing and Taipei with a few other experts to discuss this subject with both sides of the strait. So start with a little bit of historical background. I think achieving greater international space has long been a component of Taipei's foreign policy, certainly predates my Ying-jeou. It has broad domestic support within the Taiwan public, although I haven't been able to find any very recent polls. I think the last one that I found was 2008, which was the Mainland Affairs Council, that showed that 77% of respondents favored Taiwan joining UN-affiliated organizations, which is, of course, more specific than just broad international space. I think for Taiwan, the ability to participate in international organizations, and that means both what we would call intergovernmental organizations and non-governmental organizations, is a matter of dignity. It's also important to protect the interests and well-being of its citizens. So exclusion from institutions that are designed to promote cooperation on environmental issues or health-related issues. This puts at risk the safety of Taiwan's people as well as its economic prosperity. Now, one, of course, very well-known example of Taiwan's exclusion was from the World Health Organization when the SARS epidemic broke out in 2003. And at that time, Taiwan did not have timely access to information from the WHO, and that certainly caused problems. Now, in addition, Taipei wants to share its expertise with other countries. So this is another motivation of participating in the international community. Again, in the aftermath of SARS, Taiwan had really limited experience, limited opportunities to share its experience with other countries. And of course, Taiwan has a great deal of expertise in relation to issues such as disaster relief or environmental protection or alternative energy sources, many other issues, of course, that can benefit others. So Taiwan has things that it brings to the table and wants to be able to join international fora so that it can join in the conversation and share its expertise. Now, I think to be sure, at time, Taiwan's goals in joining particularly UN-affiliated intergovernmental organizations have also been political. And Taiwan does occasionally seek to assert itself as an entity that is separate from the People's Republic of China. I think this motivation is less true today under Ma Ying-jeou than it was under Chen Shui-bian. But of course, even President Ma says that Taiwan is an independent, sovereign nation and wants to join international organizations in its own right, not certainly as part of the PRC or under the PRC's umbrella. So Taiwan currently belongs to only 33 intergovernmental organizations, a large number of NGOs. It has observer status in 16 IGOs. For many years, Taipei focused its efforts on trying to regain its seat in the United Nations, which it lost in 1971. And then after Ma Ying-jeou took power in 2008, he decided to end this practice of bidding to join the UN and instead to focus on seeking meaningful participation in specialized agencies, including UN-affiliated organizations. And this approach bore fruit, I think, when Taiwan was invited in 2009 to join the World Health Assembly as an observer. After securing this observership in the WHA, Ma then, his administration, after a time elapsed, identified some new targets to seek to promote, again, Taiwan's further international space. And the two that are on the agenda today are the International Civil Aviation Organization, which is referred to as ICAO, and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, known as UNFCCC. Now, ICAO, for those of you who don't know, is a specialized UN agency that sets standards, regulations for aviation safety and security, efficiency, regulation, and environmental protection. It has a very vast structure with all sorts of levels, holds lots of different technical meetings around the world. The assembly of ICAO meets every 3 years. Most of the business of the ICAO is not done within the assembly, but it does meet once every 3 years in Montreal. And that meeting is coming up at the end of September. I think it's September 24th to the 26th. And most of the work of ICAO is actually done by the ICAO Council, which has 36 members. And although I'm not an international lawyer, I've tried to understand what the terms for observership are in ICAO. And there are different rules of procedure for the Council and for the Assembly. But the rules of procedure for the Council does seem to allow for observers. And one of the categories of potential observers in the documents is other bodies in addition to international organizations. And this might be a hook for Taiwan's participation. And I will talk about the mainland's perspective in a minute, but the mainland is quite concerned about not including Taiwan in a way that would violate the terms of the charters of international organizations. So any Taiwan participation must be in accordance with international law and with the charters of these organizations. Taiwan has argued, I think with some validity, that exclusion from ICAO is harmful to its citizens. Now, that's not to say Taiwan doesn't get any information about air safety. It does. It gets actually some through the mainland aviation organization, its CAA. It gets some through the United States. There are various other channels that it has. But Taiwan does lack access to real-time information provided on the ICAO website. And sometimes Taiwan has to relay requests through the United States to ICAO headquarters in Montreal, wait for responses to be routed through the U.S. to Taipei. And so there are potential, I think, issues here. Certainly in the case of SARS, this was, of course, a motivator, I think, a driver for the international community and including Beijing to allow Taiwan to become observer in WHA. We don't want to have a major aviation accident before people recognize that maybe it would be a good idea for Taipei to join in some status ICAO. We should also, of course, note that there are, I think it's the flights across the strait are now going up to 640, I think it is, a week. And so, you know, lots of mainland Chinese travel on these planes, too. I would think that Beijing would want to protect its citizens, and certainly Taiwan wants to protect theirs, as well as the many other international travelers. So just a couple of more facts before I move on to Beijing's perspective. Taiwan has a flight information region that covers 180,000 square nautical miles. They serve in their airports 40 million travelers annually. Taiwan is connected to 117 cities around the globe via 181 air passenger routes and 86 air freight routes. So, moving on to the perspective of Beijing on this issue, I would start by saying that the mainland does not oppose Taiwan's participation in the international community. It is the terms of that participation that are of concern to Beijing. There are criteria and, in some cases, preconditions, I think, that the mainland has. Well, we can go back to when this issue really was put on the agenda, I think, in the cross-strait relationship, which was in 2005, and Hu Jintao signed an agreement with former KMT chairman Lian Zhan that endorsed, quote, discussion on issues of participation in international activities which concern the Taiwan public. And then in 2008, Hu Jintao stated in his message to Taiwan compatriots that appropriate and reasonable arrangements could be made for Taiwan's participation in the activities of international organizations. Now, senior officials in Beijing say that the mainland would really like to find a comprehensive, systematic solution to solve the issue of Taiwan's international space. So, in fact, they are not trying to just sort of sweep this under the rug, nor did they insist that it be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. They really would like to find a solution. But a solution involves addressing China's precondition that Taiwan must express or demonstrate through concrete actions that Taiwan adheres to one China. I think this is still vague, and what the Chinese, of course, are now talking about one China framework rather than just talking about 1992 consensus. But we've also seen some movement in Taiwan, I think, of speaking about one China more clearly, but not to the extent, of course, that Beijing hopes. When I was in Beijing with the delegation just a few weeks ago, we met with an official at the Taiwan Affairs Office, and one of the things that official said was, if we can feel Taiwan's sincerity on this issue, then giving Taiwan international space can be good for reunification. But in the past 5 years, that has not happened. This is, of course, something that is evolving as we speak, since we have this ICAO meeting coming up. I think that the door is still open. A solution has not yet been found. But in the absence of this broader solution that Beijing hopes to achieve, the issue is being dealt with on a case-by-case basis, and thus the ICAO case that is pending. So the mainland, I think, has essentially two preconditions for dealing with it on a case-by-case basis as opposed to from a comprehensive perspective. It insists that any arrangements made not create a situation of two Chinas or one China, one Taiwan in the international community. And second, it insists that Taipei consult with Beijing. Now, President Ma, I think, has not rejected the notion of consultations with the mainland. I think that's clear. We can go back to Ma Ying-jeou's first inaugural address when he said in 2008, he expressed a willingness to consult with the mainland on international space as well as on a possible cross-strait peace accord. And in advance of becoming an observer to WHA, I think it's clear that Taiwan quietly talked to the mainland. Otherwise, the effort would not have been successful. Now, President Ma does not want to be seen as asking Beijing's permission. It would be political suicide for Ma to accept that Taiwan's international space is granted by Beijing. But there is a lot of space short of seeking permission. Consultations do not necessarily mean seeking permission. Of course, the opposition and DPP in Taipei may seek to use this to criticize Ma. So I think the government is now being very cautious. But if I had to make a prediction, I would say that in the last 4 weeks before this ICAO meeting, that there will be quiet consultations between Taiwan and the mainland. And I think that there is potential for some kind of outcome that would be seen as positive by both sides. I wanted to talk a little bit about Taiwan's effort to expand its economic space by signing bilateral trade agreements with other than its 23 diplomatic allies, and by joining multilateral FTAs. For bilateral agreements, as long as the appropriate nomenclature is used so that one China is preserved, and the country that is interested in seeking this bilateral accord consults with Beijing, the mainland seems willing to accept it. We can cite the agreement that was reached in July between Taiwan and New Zealand, which I think is really path-breaking. This is the first FTA-like agreement that Taiwan has signed with a non-ally. Constitutes a very small amount of Taiwan's trade, but New Zealand is a founding partner of the TPP, and soon there will be an announcement of the agreement between Taiwan and Singapore. I think in both of these cases, New Zealand and Singapore did tell Beijing the contents of this agreement, that they had an economic need for this agreement. And Beijing did not oppose. Perhaps they weighed in on the timing or something like that. I don't know. That's just pure speculation. But clearly, these are going forward. Feasibility studies are being conducted for similar agreements with the Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, and even India. Now, as a senior Taiwan official told, or senior mainland official responsible for Taiwan affairs told my, it was a senior official in Taiwan, to be clear, told my delegation last month, the agreement with New Zealand may not be called an FTA, but it will be submitted to the World Trade Organization under Article 24, just like all FTAs. So from Taiwan's perspective, call it what you like, it is a free trade agreement. Now, former KMT Chairman Wu Bo-seung raised Taiwan's interest in joining the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP, when he met with Xi Jinping last June. And he also raised the issue of joining ICAO. And I would mention that Xi Jinping, although he did not reject the interest in joining ICAO, his answer, as it has been reported in the Taiwan press, was less forward-leaning than Hu Jintao's response was to Li and John when they met at Vladivostok. And so it does remain to be seen whether there's any significance in that statement, but at least that's the way I read it. But focusing on the RCEP issue, again, when we were in Beijing, a Taiwan Affairs Office official we spoke with maintained that Xi Jinping encouraged Taiwan to propose ideas to make progress toward the goal of linking up cross-strait relations with Taiwan's participation in regional economic mechanisms such as RCEP. Which I viewed as a positive statement. He also indicated that that joining RCEP is a more practical goal for Taiwan than joining ICAO, which he suggested is intended to gain political status. So finally, just to briefly characterize U.S. policy on this issue. I think it's clear from statements by U.S. officials that the U.S. supports Taiwan's efforts to expand its international space. For IGOs that require sovereignty for membership, the U.S. supports meaningful participation for Taiwan. And I think the fact that President Obama recently signed the bill backing observership for Taiwan in ICAO is concrete evidence of U.S. support. U.S. officials are also talking to ICAO directly, I understand, and quietly to Beijing to promote a positive outcome. Now, these actions are seen as unhelpful by the mainland. Chinese officials claim that progress on the matter of Taiwan's participation in ICAO, for example, has been adversely affected by U.S. interference. This may or may not be true, but in my own view, Taiwan does have to strike a balance between seeking support from the international community and discussing its international space objectives with Beijing. And I'll stop there. Thank you.